For a decade, robot demos all looked the same. Pincers, two-finger grippers, suction cups, the shape of a claw. On May 7th, 2026, a startup called Genesis showed something else. A robot with five-fingered hands, cracking eggs, playing piano, solving a Rubik's Cube, all from one model. After 10 years of grippers and hand prototypes that couldn't do real work, robots finally got hands that actually function. The interesting question is why it took so long, and why it took an outsider to crack it. Almost every robot doing useful work in the last decade ran on grippers. 2 fingers, suction cups, sometimes 3. Boston Dynamics put a 3-finger electric gripper on Atlas. Warehouses and factories run 2-finger pinchers and suction. Some humanoid prototypes did add 5-finger hands, but the hardware ran ahead of the software. Nothing could actually use them. The reason wasn't aesthetics. It was math. A 2-finger gripper has 1 degree of freedom. Open. Close. That's it. A human hand has 20 or more, depending on how you count. Every extra joint multiplies the space a controller has to search. With reinforcement learning, the standard approach for the last few years, this matters a lot. 2 joints is a problem you can solve in a weekend. 20 joints is a problem that has broken most general-purpose algorithms for years. So the field made a quiet trade. Build something simpler than a hand. Lose the dexterity. Gain the ability to actually train the thing. The trade worked. Robots learned to pick boxes, fold towels, sort warehouse bins. Humanoids walked, ran, even backflipped. Useful work. Real progress. But the trade had a ceiling. A 2-finger gripper can't crack an egg. It can't strike a piano key with the right amount of force. It can't pinch a wire and twist it into a connector. There's a class of tasks the human hand was specifically evolved for, and grippers cannot enter that class. Robotics had hit the shape problem. So why did Genesis bet against the entire field? Their answer is the part that makes the story interesting. They didn't pick hands because hands are more capable. They picked hands because of data. Here's the argument. There are billions of hours of video on the internet of humans doing things with their hands. Cooking videos, craft tutorials, surgical training footage, guitar lessons. All of that, in principle, is robotics training data, already labeled by the speech of the person teaching, already grounded in physical reality, free, internet scale, but you can only use it if your robot is shaped like the human in the video. A gripper looking at a chef holding a knife with 5 fingers can't copy what it sees. The geometry doesn't map. The forces don't transfer. The video is useless. If your robot has a hand the same size and shape as the humans, every cooking video on YouTube becomes potential training data. Every surgical recording, every piano lesson. Genesis built their robot hand to be a 1-to-1 size match with a human hand, not because hands are elegant, because it's the only morphology that lets you absorb the data humans have already produced. Most robotics companies bet on better algorithms. Genesis bet on better data. And the only way to get the data was to match the shape. But internet video alone isn't enough. To train a robot to actually move its joints, you need motion data, not just pixels. So Genesis built a sensor-loaded glove, same size and shape as their robot hand. A human puts it on and just does the task. The glove records every finger position and every contact force at hundreds of times a second. Cooking, folding, sorting screws. Whatever you want the robot to learn, you put on the glove and you do it. Why a glove and not a teleoperation rig? Because teleop is expensive. A trained operator running a master arm and motion capture setup is slow to scale, and the data they produce is awkward and unnatural. A glove costs a fraction of that. You can hand it to a chef. You can hand it to a lab tech. You collect natural human motion at scale. On top of glove data, Genesis pulled in egocentric video, third-person video from cameras around the workspace, and language data from the internet. The total training set is over 200,000 hours. That's the equivalent of one person using their hands continuously for 23 years straight, no sleep. After this scale of pre-training, the most challenging new tasks need less than 1 hour of robot-specific data to fine-tune. For shorter tasks, 20 to 30 minutes is often enough to learn something brand new. That ratio is the whole game. Pre-train, enormous. Fine-tune, tiny. And then they ran the model. On real hardware. In real kitchens, real labs, real workbenches. one model, one set of weights. All of these tasks at real-world speed, with no edits or speed-ups. Cracking eggs into a pan. Switching between knife, whisk, and spatula. Holding a tomato in one hand while cutting it with the other. 4 minutes of continuous cooking with no resets. Pipetting liquid into test tubes, sealing caps, pressing centrifuge buttons. The kind of lab work where a misplaced finger ruins an experiment, and where two-finger grippers historically just couldn't do the job. Mating connectors and routing a wire harness with both hands. The kind of fine assembly that factories still hire humans for. Picking up 4 objects of different sizes in one hand at the same time, each grasped differently, and then the moment that put it on the front page. A two-handed robot solving a Rubik's Cube. No special fixtures, no magnets, no customized blocks. OpenAI did a one-handed Rubik's solve in 2019, but that was a single hand. A Bluetooth instrumented cube with sensors inside, and the equivalent of thousands of simulated years of reinforcement learning to crack that one task. Genesis is 2 hands, an ordinary cube, one model among many. And to stress test the hardware itself, the same hands playing piano. Rush E, at speed. That one is a separately trained policy, but it shows what the mechanism can do when pushed. Most of these aren't separate skills bolted together. They came from one model, trained on the same data. The piano runs a separate policy on the same hands, which tells you the hardware was never the bottleneck. What is actually inside the box? Genesis's model is a robotic foundation model. It uses something called flow matching, which predicts the next motion of every joint at the same time, conditioned on language instructions, camera images, the robot's own joint positions, and touch sensors in the fingers. Flow matching is similar to how image generation models work, but for trajectories instead of pixels. The model learns the shape of the space of all possible motions and samples from it, smoothly. The hand itself has 20 active backdrivable degrees of freedom. The control loop runs at 500 times a second. End-to-end latency, from a sensor reading a contact to the joint responding, gets as low as 3 milliseconds. For comparison, a default industrial controller would have 80 milliseconds of lag and roughly 10 times the tracking error. It's not a solve system. The data still depends on humans wearing gloves to record demonstrations. Internet video helps, but doesn't replace it. Long horizon reasoning, the kind a person does without thinking, still breaks under enough novelty. And the scaling laws for robot data look more expensive than the ones for language. But the bigger story is the shape. For a decade, the field thought hands were a luxury, a nice to have. Something to add later, after the policy work was solved. Genesis just argued the opposite. That hands are the unlock. That you can't build a foundation model for the physical world without matching the morphology of the species that already did. Their next system is full body. Coming, they say, soon.